Imagine waking up and seeing your breath indoors, ice on the inside of your windows, your mum boiling water just so you can wash your face without your hands going numb. That was winter for millions of British kids in the 60s and 70s. Most people remember that era as simple, wholesome times. But for working class families, winter meant choosing between heating and eating, between staying warm and staying safe. I've dug through housing records, parliamentary reports, and real family stories to find 12 survival tactics that kept poor families alive through those brutal months. Some of these will break your heart. Others will blow your mind with their cleverness. Let's see how they did it. 1. Living around one coal or open fire. Picture this. Your entire family's evening dinner, homework, conversation. Everything happens in one room, because that's where the only heat is. Most working class homes had a single coal grate or gas fire, usually in the living room. That was it. The rest of the house, freezing. So life contracted into that one heated space. Kids did homework there, mum did mending, dad read the paper. The living room became the nucleus of existence. This wasn't just about comfort, it was pure economics. Heating multiple rooms was a luxury poor families couldn't touch, so they adapted. One fire, one room, everyone together. That matters, but keeping that one room warm was only half the battle. 2. Portable paraffin heaters. When coal wasn't enough or you couldn't afford the chimney sweep, families turned to paraffin heaters. These little portable units ran on kerosene-cheap fuel you could grab from the corner shop. You'd light it up, and boom, instant heat. Well, instant heat with a side of fire risk and that distinctive oily smell that clung to everything. Parliamentary reports from the era actually tracked injuries from these things tipping over or catching curtains on fire. But here's the thing. When it's a choice between dangerous warmth or no warmth at all, people took the risk. Museum collections are full of these heaters because they were everywhere in homes that couldn't access mains heating. Crucial for getting by, but some families had a more permanent solution built right into their kitchens. 3. Multi-purpose range cookers. If you were lucky enough to have an Aga or Rayburn in your kitchen, you'd hit the jackpot, sort of. These weren't the designer status symbols they are today. Back then, they were workhorses. You'd feed them coal or coke, and they'd cook your meals and heat your kitchen and sometimes power your hot water or a couple of radiators if you were really fortunate. Poor households squeezed every ounce of heat from these things. The kitchen became a second warm room, somewhere to dress the kids in the morning, somewhere to dry clothes, somewhere to actually exist beyond the living room. Some families even positioned chairs right up against them just to soak up the warmth. Smart, right? But what about when you finally had to go to bed in those freezing bedrooms? 4. Hot water bottles and bed warmers at night. This one's simple but absolutely essential. Hot water bottles. You'd boil the kettle before bed, fill up a rubber bottle or a stoneware one if you had an older model, wrap it in a towel and shove it between the sheets 10 minutes before climbing in. That warm spot where your feet landed? Pure bliss. And listen, when your bedroom's so cold, you can literally see your breath. That hot water bottle isn't a comfort item. It's survival equipment. Some families used old-fashioned bed warmers, two long-handled pans filled with hot coals that you'd slide between the sheets. Seems quaint now, but it was the difference between sleeping and shivering all night. That helped at night, but during the day, families got even more creative about conserving body heat. 5. Huddling and sharing beds. Here's something oral histories reveal again and again. Families didn't just share rooms, they shared beds. Kids would pile into one bed, 2, 3, sometimes 4 of them using each other's body heat to stay warm. Or entire families would drag mattresses into the living room and sleep there, right by the fire, because at least that room had some residual warmth. Housing studies from the period document this as standard practice in poorer households. It wasn't about lack of space, though that was often true too. It was about heat. Why waste precious warmth heating separate bedrooms when you could concentrate everyone in one spot? There's something both heartbreaking and beautiful about that level of closeness born purely from necessity. Of course, keeping heat in was just as important as creating it. 6. Heavy curtains, draught-proofing, and chimney plugs. Old British houses leaked heat like sieves, single-pane windows, gaps under doors, unused chimneys acting like cold air funnels. So families fought back with whatever they had. Thick, heavy curtains, sometimes layered, sometimes made from old blankets, got hung over every window and door. Draught excluders, often just rolled up towels or homemade fabric snakes, got shoved into every gap. And here's a clever one. Chimney plugs. If you had a fireplace in a room you weren't using, you'd block it up newspaper, cardboard, whatever worked to stop cold air rushing down. Historic England's archives show this was incredibly common DIY work. Every little bit helped. Every draft stopped meant a fraction more warmth stayed inside. But you can only insulate so much when your house is fundamentally cold. So families turned inward. 7. Layering clothes, rugs, and extra blankets. Forget central heating, your body was the heating system. Families layered up like they were heading to the Arctic. Vests, jumpers, cardigans, shawls. Kids wore multiple pairs of socks. People kept coats on indoors. Blankets got draped over laps while sitting. Rugs covered cold floors so your feet didn't freeze. University studies on heating behavior from this period show these micro-heating strategies were absolutely standard. You didn't heat the house to keep people warm, you kept people warm despite the house. And honestly, there's a certain practical genius to it. Textiles and layers cost less than coal. Your body heat, trapped close, became your personal heating system. Speaking of keeping the body warm from the inside. 8. Cheap, high-calorie, starchy meals. Food wasn't just nutrition. It was fuel, literal internal heating. Poor families shifted their budgets toward filling calorie-dense foods, stews that could stretch forever. Mountains of potatoes, tinned goods, cheap cuts of meat simmered for hours, processed foods fortified with whatever vitamins they could pack in. Government food expenditure reports from the 70s clearly show this pattern. When budgets got tight and fuel costs rose, food budgets compensated. Hot, starchy meals did double duty. They filled empty bellies and generated body heat through digestion. A big bowl of thick stew on a freezing night? That wasn't just dinner. That was warmth you could eat. But even with all this, heating still cost money families didn't have, so they got ruthlessly strategic about when to heat. 9. Economizing heating times. Here's a brutal calculation families made every single day: heat for 2 hours or heat for 4. Most poor households didn't heat continuously. They rationed it. Heat only in the evening when everyone's home. Heat only the living room, never the bedrooms. Turn everything off before bed. Deal with the cold in the morning. Research on heating transitions documents this practice extensively. It wasn't unusual, it was normal. You'd come home from school to a freezing house and wait for Dad to get home and light the fire. That moment when the warmth finally started spreading, you lived for that. This kind of discipline meant fuel lasted longer, but it also meant living in genuine discomfort for huge chunks of the day. And when families couldn't manage even that. 10. Community and charity support. Pride only keeps you warm until hypothermia sets in. Then you accept help. Local churches, the Salvation Army, community groups, they stepped in when things got desperate. Soup kitchens offered hot meals. Church halls became warming centers. Charity shops provided cheap coats and blankets. For the poorest families, especially elderly pensioners living alone, this support was literally life-saving. The Salvation Army's records from this era show massive winter aid programs, soup runs, emergency heating grants, clothing distributions. It wasn't a perfect safety net, not even close, but it was something. and something meant the difference between making it through January or not. Of course, all of this depended on actually having fuel to burn. 11. Low-cost solid fuels. Coal, coke, briquettes. These were the backbone of working-class heating well into the 70s. Where mains gas was unavailable or unaffordable, households bought solid fuels usually in small amounts, whatever they could manage that week. There were even informal fuel markets where you could get cheaper coal, sometimes salvaged or lower quality, but it burned, and that's what mattered. Financial records show solid fuels remained absolutely central in poorer homes throughout this period. Even as newer heating systems appeared in middle-class houses, working-class families were still shoveling coal into grates because that's what they could afford barely. And when even proper insulation was out of reach, people improvised. 12. Improvised insulation and DIY fixes. This is where desperation met ingenuity. Families stuffed gaps with newspaper, used old rugs as makeshift wall hangings, tacked felt around door frames, shoved rags into cracks in window frames, created temporary chimney plugs from cardboard and tape. Historic guidance from the period shows draught-proofing advice circulating in community centres and housing offices, but the reality was most people couldn't afford professional help. So they made do. They experimented. They used whatever materials they had lying around. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't permanent. But it worked just enough to take the edge off the cold, and just enough was sometimes all you needed to survive another winter. So there you have it, 12 survival strategies that millions of British families relied on just to make it through winter. 1 fire, paraffin fumes, body heat shared between siblings, stew for warmth, newspapers in the window cracks. If you found this eye-opening, there's a whole world of social history like this that never makes it into the nostalgia reels. Real stories, real struggles, real people finding real solutions. Thanks for watching. Stay warm out there and maybe appreciate that thermostat a little more.